Good evening. I'm just going to start doing something I have to do first, so just chill. I'll explain later, okay? Sudu Kutone Sana Tempa Suma Sumwa Mache Shata Yoda Yonjo Project Yoken Sola Exe Shila Tempa Tepana Achi Chuki Tomatsu Marcheta Jidashe Dam Madarva Shaka Genki Tomati Shela Dacha Yonjo Project Yoken Sola Oje Natodu Kyopa Jidensun Gongchen Lame Tempa Sumwa Mar Dam Jida Shashe Dam Madarva Shada Genki Tomati Shela Yajo Dacha Yonjo Project Yoken Sola Tunken Kasung Tamchen to Vene to the Sanjay Kusun to the Chukka Jita Shashe Damle Madarva Shata Genki Toma Disha Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Urban Dharma. I'm Bill. I'm a member here. And tonight we're going to be starting the first of a series of 9 classes that Dr. Lai is going to be giving on Vajrayana from the view of meditation and conduct. And he will explain more about the classes. I'm just going to introduce you to, for those of you who aren't regulars here at our temple, tell you a little bit about our temple and what this body here does. We're an open Buddhist temple in Asheville. We're here to be a Buddhist temple for anyone who wants to come. You don't have to be necessarily interested in Buddhism, but certainly that's what we do here. We have a regular group of people who have a regular practice and a lineage who meet here on this night, actually meeting on Wednesday nights. But we also have various open sanghas, most particularly the Thursday night. The one you come to tonight is open, and we welcome everyone here tonight. And come for this one, come for all 9 if you can, come for 3 of them, come for as many as you can. A little bit about Urban Dharma. We are completely volunteer run. No one here gets paid for anything they do. Dr. Lai gives us all of his time as a teacher. In the Buddhist tradition, he doesn't take pay for anything he does. And his time is very valuable, and we know that because His Holiness is always taking them off to other parts of the world. So we're always very glad that we get to have them here at the time. So these are very precious teachings for us and for everyone here. We have other events coming up. Joe, would you like to say a few words about the two more events coming up? I know we have. Joseph, there's two more events coming up, one on 4th of July and one this weekend, which of course is only for people who've had the empowerment. You want to?
I will quickly say something.
Okay.
This coming weekend, if you attended the program that Ondur Rinpoche did maybe a month ago, this is kind of a follow-up for that program. So it's in the form of practice, experience, and also further instructions on that practice. This is the Doge Trollo practice. So if you did not come to that program, then this weekend you can still come if you want to join us. If you have at some point received a Guru Rinpoche to many of you, perhaps this is like, don't worry. That's why we're here, to figure out what all these things are. And then on 4th of July, we have a visiting teacher, Kempo Nima Kondu. He is a good friend from a long time ago. I've known him for a long time. He is a Kempo, meaning like a doctor of divinity. In the Nyingma lineage, for those of you who know more, then more specifically the Peiyu lineage, and he lives in Nepal, in Boulder. He happens to be up in New York City, invited by the Sherpa and Yomo communities. These are Tibetanized mountain people that live in the mountains of Nepal. There's a sizable community in New York City, and every year they would invite him to go teach them and guide them. And so I noticed that he was in the U.S. He has been here before twice, and this will be the third time. The last time he was here, he gave a Guru Rinpoche in common. And this time he said he's going to do a Buddha of Compassion, Avalokiteshvara empowerment, and give a practice that he will guide us through called Avalokiteshvara of the six realms, Buddha of Compassion appearing in the six realms of existence. So that will be on July 4th. We start at 10. We ask that you be here by 9:30, 9:45 and get settled in. And this program will go through to 1 o'clock. So it's from 10 to 1. And this is July 4th.
And the program this weekend, for those of you who are coming, is the first teaching and practice starts at 10, and they go on and off the teaching and practice until I believe about 5, and then on Sunday it's from 9 to 1. And with those of you who are regular members of Urban Dharma, please raise your hand. Just so if anyone here is interested and wants to learn more about Urban Dharma who hasn't been here before, just see one of us, and we're always happy to talk to you. The other thing to mention is we're always looking for more supporting members. The way that we pay for this temple is a little tiny bit through these contributions that we all make for classes and visiting teachers, but it's mostly through our membership, people who become regular sustaining members. And we are very, very fortunate. I'm the treasurer here, and I can report we're very fortunate that we have a solid financial ability to do what we're doing right now. And that could change at any time. It's been different in the past, but we're very grateful for that. So thank you all for coming. And we do hope anyone who ever has any interest will consider becoming a member. Also, you can follow Urban Dharma on Facebook, and that's the way that you'll always find out about all of the events that are coming up. Just quick housekeeping, there's a bathroom in the back on the right first door on the left, and Dr. Lai will announce a little break in the middle, but if at any time you get up and use the bathroom, just go quietly, nobody but try to walk behind the camera, more eye over there. Any other announcements or questions or anything?
Just to clarify, the membership is really like public radio, so there is no set amount that you have to give. Literally, we have someone who gives $1 a month, so an annual $12 pledge. So membership is really a way to kind of be involved, a way to signal to yourself and to others that you think it's important to have urban Dharma here. So we really want people to think about membership as not what am I going to get out of it, but as a way for you to express that yes, this is important. It's important for such a place to exist in this town. So you can pledge anything. Maybe you can be the person that will allow me to say, literally, we have someone who pledges 50 cents a month. So that would be even more inspiring. So don't be shy and think, oh, that's not going to help. It helps. Energetically, it helps, and you're going to hear a little bit about that soon, about energetically.
Thank you, Dr. Bai. Any other further questions or announcements? Okay, without further ado, Dr. Bai.
Yeah, so I usually don't start like this, but so energetically. Some of you know me long enough, it's like, what? Yeah, exactly. What? But a lot of Vajrayana things is about energetically. So first off, I would say it might not be your cup of tea, and it's quite all right. We say that the Buddha taught 84,000 methods to awakening. Well, some tradition will insist that in order to wake up, you need all 84,000, but I'll leave that to, there are various interpretations. So one school of thought says 84,000, if you know how to use one of them, they include all the other. Okay? So first thing to say is that, yeah, it might not be something that resonates with you. But when we talk about Vajrayana, there is an emphasis on the energetic level. So what we're talking about here is this. So there is the physical level, and so there's the physical body, and then there is what we might call a mental body. So the science of the mind. And I think that is quite well known these days. If you look at Buddhism and all the research, the mindfulness movement. So there's a lot of understanding and awareness about this mental body, so to say, and the various techniques of training this mental body. But one of the things most distinctive about Vajrayana is also an emphasis on what you might call the psychic body or the energetic body. And that is a body that negotiates between the physical and the mental. Yeah, so if the physical is gross and you can touch it and you can see it and then sometimes you can smell it, it depends on how close you're sitting. And then the mental body is, purely intangible. There's this body that negotiates between the two. And that's the energetic body. Now we're at the risk of my usual attitude. It's like, okay, we are going off into woo. But I would not be representing the tradition like if I don't immediately say, like, there is also in the Vajrayana an emphasis on paying attention to the psychic body this energetic body, however you want to put it. Yeah. So right at the beginning, before we started this program, before we started this evening, not planned, I didn't think about it. As I was sitting here looking at the handout in this form, I felt that I had to do an offering. This is an offering to what we call the Dharma protectors, or the Dharma palas. So these are imagined as, and again, in these 9 weeks, we're going to look into some of these in more detail. So what you're going to hear, is just sort of an example of what I'm talking about. There's an emphasis on the energetic level. And so if you're open to it, if you're in tune in it, there are both pros and cons. You can get very busy if you're constantly picking up, right, whatever that is going on around you energetically. But in Vajrayana practice, you are also sort of learning to kind of pay attention to what sorts of energy to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. And so anyway, in terms of this evening, I decided to pay attention, and it says, well, before you start this 9 weeks, you want to sort of make an offering to those energies that have pledged to protect the integrity of these teachings. Okay? So again, you don't have to believe that they are real. But what I'm saying is, for those who are open to this, you will start imagining them, and then once you have imagined them, you have to do something with them. And I'm not saying this, to sound, I don't know, like not superstitious. At the core of the tradition, there's always that piece that is always there. Are these real? Well, real enough. Are they ultimately real? No. But real enough. So that is another way of looking at this energetic level. Because from there, what this whole tradition wants to say is, as well, the physical level is also merely real enough. And then the mental emotional level is also merely real enough. So on all 3 levels, so in Vajrayana vocabulary, you will hear outer, inner, secret. So like these are the 3 levels, outer, inner, secret. It's a triad that you will come across a lot if you're looking at Vajrayana material. So basically they're talking about the physical level, yeah, and then this subtle level, this energetic body, and then the third one, the mental, emotional body. Now, this is not just in matters that we would consider as religious or spiritual. In fact, the Tibetan medical tradition, in some ways, they are the specialists actually on the energetic body, on that subtle body. So in some of the Buddhist texts, they say that the medical tradition, in fact, has even a more precise and profound understanding of the energetic body than the explicitly like spiritual material. And so what it's saying is like, there's a whole body of knowledge related to this energetic body that goes beyond what the Buddhist texts have talked about. But for purposes of the Buddhist project, so to say, you don't need to know everything about the energetic body. Just certain aspects of it that is related to the fundamental concern of the Buddha, which is we are now bound by a confusion. That is the basic problem. And the solution is how to unbind, how to be free from these entanglements. Right? So in all forms of Buddhism, that's basically where we all agree. We are now bound. Bound by what? Bound by what's often translated as ignorance or confusion. This fundamental ignorance or confusion. What is the solution? Solution is to be free from. Be free from that. So you can sit maybe up over here, grab a cushion and be comfortable. It's a little bit, just hearing a voice and not seeing someone, a little bit spooky. So feel free, here. You want to come up here maybe for the cushion? Bill, you want to drag the cushion? Yeah. Yeah, so Vajrayana, gives focus on this energetic body and recruits, right, knowledge about this energetic body that is not even like the exclusive domain of Buddhist concern. And in fact, if you look at even the earlier layers of Buddhism, without any explicit Vajrayana elements, the historical Buddha was already talking about some of these energies. Later, we're going to hear about, for example, like the 5, what they call winds, lung in Tibetan. So there is the downward expelling winds, and then there is the digestive winds. So these are poetically called winds, but they are forms of energy that move within the body. So, for example, the downward expelling wind or energy is those energies that kind of regulate our body discarding waste. So then the upward movement is another kind of energy related to movement, so like physical movement. Then there is the fire energy, which is related to your ability to digest food and to absorb nutrients. So this is already mentioned in very early Buddhist sources. But over there, they did not necessarily connect that knowledge with the task of freeing yourself from bondage. In the earliest layer, the concern is almost all just on the physical body and the mental, emotional body. Not much explicit discussion about this subtle body, this psychic body, this energetic body. So this is one example of how Vajrayana is a little different. So now let's go back to the very beginning and define some terms. First of all, I will start with what was sent out in the announcement about this course. Let me start there. So it says, according to mainstream Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana is the third of 3 levels of practice given by the Buddha for us to overcome sufferings of samsara and awaken to the state of complete freedom. So Vajrayana is the third of 3 levels. Then it goes on to say, practice of Vajrayana necessarily requires the practice of Mahayana and Hinayana. So that Vajrayana Buddhism is a Buddhist system that integrates all 3 levels of practice. So here we have 3 Sanskrit terms: Vajrayana, Mahayana, and Hinayana. So first, let's define terms. In the context of this course, whenever these 3 terms are used, please remember that they are not referring to any other existing forms of Buddhism that you might run into walking down the street in Asheville. You're likely to run into Buddhists in Asheville. But These terms, Mahayana, Hinayana, do not refer to any existing groups of Buddhists. These terms, Mahayana, Hinayana, and Vajrayana, have their particular historical context, have their particular points in the history of Buddhism, where different groups of Buddhists, different Buddhist communities, were using these terms either as a way to define themselves or as a way to not so friendly talk about other people. Yes, Buddhists did that. They're humans too. So there's a historical context to what these terms were referring to. But now, when we talk about how Vajrayana practice is dependent on Mahayana and Hinayana, we are not talking about, in order to practice Tibetan Buddhism, on Wednesday night here, on Tuesday night, you need to go to a Zen center to practice Mahayana. And on Monday night, you need to go to a Theravada place to practice Hinayana. We're absolutely not talking about that. But there's a lot of confusion of terms that has led to kind of this idea that, oh, somehow Tibetan Buddhism encompasses all forms of Buddhism. I think that's not a very nice thing, and for that matter, more importantly, not a very accurate thing to say. All existing forms of Buddhism have their own terms of understanding. What the hierarchy is and how things fit or don't fit, what texts they accept as authoritative and what they don't accept as authoritative. We're not talking about other groups of Buddhists. We're talking about Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism's understanding of how these three levels are connected. And in fact, then from this perspective, all three levels are necessary. They have to come together in a cohesive way. So Tibetan Buddhism practices, Tibetan Buddhism talks about the Buddhist path as consistent. These three levels. So that's what we're going to be looking at. These three levels are also called three yanas. So now, Hinayana. Hina literally means small. In fact, not like, like less is more, small is beautiful, but really, originally, Hina means petty, narrow. So you can imagine, like way back, for sure nobody went around going, I'm Hinayana, right? It's a term used by those who call themselves Mahayana, which means great. Great, petty, little, historical. So Maha means great, Hina means small, and Vajra is the name of a mythic weapon. That it is said that the king of the gods, which is imagined in India as a warrior, and an invincible warrior, because he possesses this weapon called Vajra. And this Vajra is imagined as like a thunderbolt. So like Zeus and his thunderbolt. They're related in these Indo-European cultures. So Vajrayana means, Vajra is a reference to that indestructible weapon. And so this is that which can destroy everything and nothing can destroy it. So it's the indestructible. So you have the little, you have the great, and then you have the indestructible. Yana means vehicle. So like the vehicle that you drove to get here or took to get here. So it's the little vehicle, the great vehicle, and then the indestructible vehicle. Again, historically, different Buddhist communities will point to themselves and say, we are these. Well, except for the first one. The first one is just a label that people pointed over there. Right? Those Hinayana types over there. But what happened is that, and now I'm speaking more sort of like from a historical point of view, based on solid, historical evidence that we have. What happened in Buddhist India is that over time, by like 9th, 10th, 11th century, a particular understanding with regards to all these differences that came before that time, a particular understanding emerged within mainstream Indian Buddhism that embraced basically all these differences and said that in fact, what superficially looks like a contradiction between the claims of this community and the claims of that community and the claims of that community is only so because you lack vision of the whole picture. That in fact, all these differences were taught by the Buddha to suit whoever he was addressing. And that in fact, all these differences come together in a holistic way. And particularly that great Indian Buddhist institution called Nalanda University kind of promoted that view. Nalanda University was like one of the greatest universities that the world has ever seen. And it wasn't just a place where people study theology, but all the different sciences and all the different arts were championed and taught at Nalanda. So the Nalanda tradition basically harmonized all these differences. So the equivalent would be for the Western intellectual tradition. Imagine that at some point, there was this attempt, perhaps by the Catholic Church, which of course did not happen, to take the Catholic approach, the universal approach, and brought in everyone, right? All the heretics, the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, brought in everyone and say, actually, all the things that you guys, teach, they all fit into this bigger puzzle. And they are all to be used cohesively with this like single path. And so this is basically what happened in Indian Buddhism from the 19th century onwards. And it was this tradition that chiefly got transplanted in Tibet. Then, of course, in Tibet, having received this approach, then, of course, then in Tibet, it also further developed to kind of answer Tibetan questions without, we say, straying from the main points being made. So Tibetan Buddhism, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama will always remind people, is basically what's called the Nalanda tradition. So the Nalanda tradition, God brought to Tibet. So in that way, it is Tibetan Buddhism, in a way, you could say, represents the most comprehensive development of Buddhism in India. And then it got transplanted to Tibet, and of course, it also picked up Tibetan flavors. So within this broad umbrella of Tibetan Buddhism, there are, not surprisingly then, you can find all sorts of different texts translated from India, different traditions brought from India, and over time, Tibetans kind of figured out. So even like the whole gamut of different traditions in India. In fact, when I say like the Nalanda tradition has come up with this cohesive view, you should not think that therefore everybody in India, kind of knew about that. So there were also kind of different traditions being introduced into Tibet that wasn't kind of brought together, but once it got to Tibet, it kind of got absorbed into this kind of more holistic approach. So what I want to say is that you might come once or twice or a few times to these nine classes and go, I don't know, this is a little bit out there, Well, that's fine. Well, of course, it's fine in any case, but that's fine even like from a born again Tibetan Buddhist perspective. Like, oh, you're not into this Vajrayana stuff? We have other stuff. Yeah? We have other stuff. So, for example, there is the Lojong teachings, Lojong tradition, that at one point historically was sort of like a complete approach that some people just focus on and specialize in. And the Lojong teachings in contemporary West is most like, if you want to say, the person who kind of put it on the map are basically, I would say, in my opinion, the writings of Pema Chodron. So she has sort of put, Lojong, on the map, of the spiritual map of the West. In the same way that Thich Nhat Hanh put the practice of mindfulness, on the map. So I would say Pema Chodron is responsible for that. And in that tradition, and so if you're attracted to, say, the writings of Pema Chodron, that's squarely sort of in the Lojong tradition, and not much discussion on the energetic body, the subtle body, and the workings of the energy. No. But that too is part of Tibetan Buddhism. Then some of you might have, read a lot of like Tibetan philosophical works, like all these writings on emptiness and various types of emptiness. 16 types of emptiness. That's in one system. After you've mastered that, then there's like self-emptiness, emptiness of the other, and all these tenet systems. And you could do all of that and have not much to do with Vajrayana. It's like, I don't know that Vajrayana stuff. So it's a big house that falls under this Tibetan Buddhism. So specifically what we want to do in these 9 weeks, this course, is to give more focus on the form of Tibetan Buddhism with an emphasis on Vajrayana as well. Now, of course, we can't really talk of Vajrayana independent of Mahayana and Hinayana. So we're going to also include the other two, because mainstream Tibetan Buddhism says you cannot practice Vajrayana without also practicing Mahayana and Hinayana. And so over the course of the 9 weeks, we're going to look at, what is this Hinayana, what is this Mahayana. Then the other triad in this course is view, meditation, and conduct. So this is another kind of organizing principle that emerged in the Nalanda tradition that says that it's actually 4 parts: view, meditation, conduct, and result or fruition. They say in the Nalanda tradition, it says you can basically take these 4 things and go ask any spiritual tradition. That you can investigate or look into any spiritual tradition by asking, what is their view, what is their meditation, what is their conduct, and what is the result. Then that is a good way to understand exactly everything you need to understand about any spiritual tradition. But since we're talking about the Buddhist tradition, then, so even within the various Buddhist traditions, we say you could ask, what is the view? What is the meditation? And what is the conduct? And here we don't talk much about the fruition because we say, well, no matter what form of Tibetan Buddhism, the result is always the same. So that we don't need to talk much about. But we can learn a lot about different forms of Tibetan Buddhism by asking, how do you all talk about the view? Like your understanding of what the problem is. And then based on that understanding, what is meditation? Meaning, what do you practice in terms of how you train the mind? Conduct, and as a result of your understanding of the view, and as you train in your conduct, in your meditation, in your inner training, how is it supposed to impact the way you exist in the world? How do you conduct yourself in the world? Based on the meditation that you're doing, which is based on the view that informs the meditation. So you could sort of think of it as, the view is, the view, right? And then the inner training is the meditation, and then your outer conduct. So the outer conduct is perhaps you can say the do's and the don'ts, right? And so the do's and the don'ts flows from your inner training. And then your inner training has to be informed by the view. But we will look at these three categories. The handout that you have, basically, we are going to look at view, meditation, conduct, this concept. And then it also has the readings that we will need for the first 3 weeks, which is going to be focused on view. Okay? So tonight we will do an overview of this organizing principle of view, meditation, conduct, and kind of like have a sense of the roadmap. Now, what are we talking about? When we say view, when we say meditation, when we say conduct. Now, don't try to understand it all. This is like giving you a roadmap. Don't try too hard to get everything. Just kind of have an idea of what this roadmap is. Then we're already in a pretty good place. So now I'm going to pause and drink something, and then give you a chance to say, wait, can you say more about it? So questions or comments? Yes?
I have
Mm-hmm.
So Tibetan Buddhism, for Father Sambhava, so that one branch right in the I forgot the Mama or something. He said that.
What Nalanda tradition?
Yeah, Nalanda.
Yes. And your question is?
Or that's what Father Sambhava brought into Tibet, right?
Dhammasambhava is only one of many figures
Okay.
that was, doing the work of bringing Buddhism from India to Tibet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is only one of many figures. Yeah, and the whole tradition that came is Nalanda tradition. Yes.
I have studied
Uh-huh.
Maya.
Oh, good.
A question that always comes
Yeah.
to me is I hear about the view, but it's like a mystery. It's like I see here the view is this, and that I've heard so many times that it's really important to have the view, but I don't know what the view is.
Right. Well, we'll see. We'll see. All I'm going to say is that the reason why view is emphasized so much is related, right at the heart of it, right? Is that the way the Buddha talked about the fundamental problem that we have is a problem of not seeing clearly. And so the vocabulary of seeing, of view, is very strong in Buddhist material. And people who do comparative studies will say, and in Hindu material, there is more emphasis on sonic sound. In Buddhist tradition, all the metaphors, not all, but there's a strong number of metaphors used in Buddhist tradition that keeps emphasizing sight and seeing. Because that is related to how the Buddha talked about what our basic problem is. Our basic problem is not seeing clearly. So from there, so view that you said, I don't know what that means, and here immediately you can say, oh, view is wisdom. See, the reason why maybe still you're like, so what is this view? Is because, as it turns out, it's not one thing. It's depending on where you're standing, you need to see clearly. Now you have walked up to the next hill. Well, you need to see clearly again. And then you have walked to another hill now. You need to see clearly again, right? And so where you are standing determines what clear seeing entails. So in fact, it is said that Buddhists, right? So in this tradition, Buddha is not a singular person. Buddhists are in the plural, meaning any and everyone that is awake, free from confusion, see clearly, or the expression is seeing things as they are, rather than seeing things as they appear to be, but seeing things as they are. These are Buddhists. Buddhists are those who definitively now are no longer under the power of confusion or ignorance, and they see things as they are. Right? And they say, Buddhists have no views. Buddhists are free from views. Yeah? As important as getting the view is, it's all instrumental. But instrumental is extremely important when we are on this side of confusion. When we're on this side of confusion, we in fact need to have the right view at all times. But what is the right view? It depends on where you are standing. Yeah, so one example would be something like this. If you find one. So as long as the Dalai Lama, as probably you know, is engaged in a lot of like interfaith dialogue, talks and discussion. So at one particular meeting of this sort, I think the theme was like on compassion. So it's a meeting with people of different faiths, different traditions, and at some point in this meeting, somebody raised a question and said, so I also have read something about the Buddhist teaching on emptiness. Can you elaborate on that? And he kind of laughed and chuckled. He's like, no. And the question was like, why? It's like, well, because the topic here today is compassion across like spiritual traditions and even non-spiritual, secular traditions. And he said, and many traditions, their notion of compassion is so closely tied to the belief in a all-powerful, all-loving God. And the Buddhist understanding of emptiness extends to such a God. And it's not appropriate for me to talk about that here, because it might undermine the basis of your compassion, and that would be very bad. So that view of emptiness is not appropriate if it's going to undermine your practice of compassion. So in this tradition, view is seen as something that is progressive. The example I like to use is it's like a monkey, trying to safely get across a very dangerous jungle. So you don't want to be traveling on the floor of the jungle. There are all sorts of animals waiting to eat you. And so then to go from one end of the jungle to the other end, you rely on these vines that you're going to swing from one vine to the next to the next. So not that any of us have been monkeys in this lifetime at least, but you can sort of imagine, right? To effectively go from one end of the forest to the other, at any given time you have to grasp onto a vine. But you're not going to go very far if you don't know when to let go of the last vine and hold on to the next vine. So these views are all these vines. And without relying on these vines, you're not going to get to safety on the other end. And if you don't hold tight enough, you're going to slip, and then you're going to be eaten by the leopard that's down there. But if you are terrified or you hold on too tightly to either 2 or 1, you're not going anywhere. And you might even lose the momentum to swing to the next one. So this idea that the view will keep, kind of changing. So view is a little slippery in that sense. Other questions? Comments? Unfortunately, if you're watching out there, there's at least one downside of watching out there. And if you're not local, I guess not much we can do about it. Is we're not equipped to handle questions from out there. We live in Nashville, and the comfort level of the technology is not exactly like the Bay Area. But we're very fortunate that we have enough of a team working together to set up this. Yes.
I have one comment.
Yeah.
I see how relative the terms can be. It reminds me a little bit of absolute relativism with Nagarjuna's philosophy.
Yeah, there's something like that, and yeah, related to that, yes. And so he's referring to some very technical things that maybe we'll look into. But you just reminded me of over at the retreat that we just did in Southern Dharma, someone offered this eloquent way of talking about this, which I'm going to butcher, right? Basically, I've read his stuff before, but this is like a previous life. There is a philosophy of science person, Thomas Kuhn. We talked about what is this? These paradigms, right? These kind of scientific paradigms, and that in a way, this is not about looking for capital T truth. Yeah, this is looking about, given a particular paradigm, what can it do? So, like, I think someone mentioned, like, for example, Newton's law, right? Compared to what we know now, it's kind of primitive. But that's good enough to send someone to the moon and bring the person back. And that's pretty impressive. Even though it's not true. Yeah? But that got someone to the moon and got the person back. And so, in many ways, the view that we're talking about, the views that we talk about, that Buddha taught, right? I think, for me, it's best for us to relate to them in that way. I've often said, like, put aside whatever you think capital T truth is. Like put that aside. I'm not saying that the Buddha did not see capital T truth. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. Necessarily, if they're Buddhists, yes, they have seen that. The capital T truth. But in terms of what they taught, we don't need to go into the realm of capital T truth. Because in fact, one of the things that Buddha said is like, as long as we are on this side of confusion, any attempts to actually talk about capital T truth is useless. Zero. Instead, he says, I have the path. I will show you the path. So on the path, he uses many, many different paradigms that is suited to wherever you are in your development. Yeah, if you need to bring someone back from the moon, stick with Newton. Yeah, and the implications of his theory. If you're trying to do something else, then you need a different one. So I often say, some of you have heard this countless times, like don't relate to Buddhist teachings as, like these capital T truths. It's not very useful. We just become very dogmatic. And the problem with becoming very dogmatic is then we will find ourselves at some point going, I believe this, or I don't believe this anymore. Both are not very useful. Yeah, I believe or I don't believe. Once you kind of relate to it and understand it and how the Buddha intended this to be used, to be actualized, then it's really not an issue of do I have to believe or do I not have to believe. So I jokingly say, most of you have heard about the Four Noble Truths, right? I said, okay, you've heard about the Four Noble Truths, but it's better that you be honest about this and say they are the Four Noble Rumors. It has been rumored, that there is dukkha, that there is suffering. It has been rumored, that suffering has a cause and is grasping. Right? Now, between rumor and truth, what's supposed to happen? You are supposed to see this. If you don't see this, at best, it's a noble rumor. And of course, if you convert to some other religion, you say, oh, that's just a vicious rumor. Life is just fine. But, to be Buddhist, it's sufficient to say, those are the Four Noble Rumors. So, noble enough for you to go see if it's true or not. But not like, go see if it's true or not, like to pick a fight. But to realize, in my experience, this makes sense. Not head sense, heart sense. In fact, more important than head sense, heart sense. This makes sense. And then when you begin to see that it makes sense, you're like, okay, it's moving in the direction of truth now. And then it says, until we are Buddhists, whatever understanding we have it cannot be the capital teacher. And this is really, I think, prevents any honest Buddhist, from getting all worked up fighting with someone about, this is more true than that. You're not Buddha yet. How would you know? So let's look at the handout. Oh, better than let's look at the handout. Let's take a break. So stretch, if you need something to drink, there is hot water, or we can make hot water back there. There's tea bags. There's mugs. I don't think we can stop that. We can pause it. Once we stop it, we lose the good.
Yeah, I don't think we can pause it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
You can just live stream the break.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
No, you can do it. You can do it. I need to get out.
Sorry, I'm in your way.
Okay.
I've been texting with Nathan, I guess he's been texting with you. Is this muted or is this still live? That's okay.
I can mute it.
Oh, yeah. So, on page 1 of this handout, this is on the Song of View, Meditation, Conduct, and Fruition. The song was composed, so to say. These are spontaneous songs. It's a songs of realization. So great masters, from within the space of their realization, often someone asking a question, and then in this case, Milarepa answered in the form of these songs. So this particular one, we won't look at this yet, but you can read over it. I don't know if we will go over it tonight. Instead, page 2 and 3, two other, which deals with the 3 yanas. So I'm actually going to start with the 3 yanas before we look at the view meditation conduct. In a way, view meditation conduct is a guiding, like, kind of the structure of the course. So we should start with the 3 yanas. So I already talked about how within Tibetan Buddhism, it said that you have to practice all 3 yanas if you want to practice Vajrayana. So we can start with the second song on page 2. This was composed by a contemporary teacher, Khenpo Sujun Gyamso. He's alive, quite old now. He comes from the Kagyu lineage, Dharma Kagyu. And so let me read this song one time. So it says, without practicing renunciation at the start, giving rise to the supreme longing for liberation is difficult. So first meditate in various ways that frighten you. Then, to the 3 rare and supreme ones and the 3 roots, go for refuge. Next, you need to practice emptiness and compassion. For without practicing emptiness, how can you cut samsara's root? And without the practice of love and compassion, what could ever close the door on clinging to the extreme of peace? The great secret practices are those of pure vision. Without them, what could ever stop fixation on impurity? To gain stable certainty in the practice of pure vision that sees the universe as mandala and all beings as deities, when you can see even your enemy as a Buddha, know that this is what the practice of pure vision is all about. So here, Khenpo Sujun Gyamso, basically, there are several ways of talking about the 3 yanas. But here, basically, in 3 verses, he has distilled kind of the essence of what the 3 yanas is about. So the first yana, the hina yana. So in this view of the 3 yanas, not as opposing Buddhist traditions, but rather part of a holistic approach, hina is interpreted as narrow or small in that it's focused on your own situation. So then it says here, of course you have to start there. Yeah? If you don't see, right, your own mess, then what can you do about anything else? Right? You can't clean up other people's mess if you don't know how to clean up your own mess. The mess here is not seeing clearly. So necessarily it has to begin with hina, which is primarily focused on your own situation. So in this sense, you could take some poetic license and say, this is the vehicle, or this is the focus on the individual as the starting point. So then, from there, once you see your own situation, and if you can see very clearly what that is about, then almost inevitably, you begin to see beyond the individual. Now, your view has expanded to the other. That's when it becomes Mahayana, the great concern, the great vehicle. Then once you kind of see the big picture, the great vehicle, the big concern, then it is said you need what it says, the superior techniques of the indestructible, the Vajrayana, the indestructible vehicle. Now, what are the contents of these three vehicles? The first one, the key word, if you have a highlighter, is you highlight renunciation. So that's like the key to the first yana is renunciation. And we'll talk about that. Next, what is the key to Mahayana? The key to Mahayana is these two emphases that superficially or initially might seem like they are contradictory, but it's basically the unified practice of, what do you think? Emptiness and compassion. Right? So it said that these are basically two sides of the same coin. So those of you who are familiar with the Heart Sutra, so the famous line, form is emptiness and emptiness form. That is at the heart of what this is talking about. Emptiness and compassion. So it says that is at the core of this greater view. Then the third yana, according to this song, what will you highlight? Pure vision. So it's the training in pristine vision. Increasingly, I prefer the word pristine rather than pure. It's just a personal choice. I think pure is loaded with all kinds of meanings. That's a little bit treacherous. We might bring in inadvertently old baggage from whatever you were brought up in, pure, impure, you're not pure, like all sorts of weird stuff of that kind. So a more neutral word might be pristine, but if pure has no, particular baggage, you can just say pure vision. But this notion of pristine vision, so it's related to clarity, seeing the pristine nature of everything. Renunciation at the heart of the first level. The unified practice of emptiness and compassion at the heart of the second level. And third, the practice of pristine vision. Seeing things in a pristine way is at the heart of the third level. So these are practices that we do. These are not things that we believe in. Of course, it will involve belief and faith and trust. But the emphasis is not, you should believe in these three things. So let's look at the first one. It says, without practicing renunciation at the start, giving rise to the supreme longing for liberation is difficult. So here, of course, he is already assuming that liberation is what we want. So liberated from what? Well, if you're completely unfamiliar with the Buddhist tradition, then you should know that liberated from an existence that is based on not seeing clearly things as they are. And in fact, under the power of this basic confusion, that confuses between the way things appear to be and the way they truly are. Basically, that's the fundamental discrepancy. Our senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. And then in the Buddhist way of talking about things, it says the intellect is the sixth sense, like thoughts, thinking thoughts. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thinking are these 6 doors in which experiences take place. So it's said that we have dukkha, or suffering. Suffering is too imprecise. Dukkha as the existential problem that the Buddha identified. Has a whole range of meaning from dissatisfaction, unsatisfactoriness, all the way to full-blown suffering, the types of suffering that we might see on TV or news of horrible things happening, whether around the corner or on the other side of the wall. That kind of suffering to this very subtle the sense that something is just not right. All of this is dukkha. The Buddha says dukkha arises because we don't see things as they are. In fact, whatever our senses seems to experience, we take to be real. And that's where dukkha begins. So as long as we have this fundamental confusion, then we are bound. Then we have no freedom. Then we are bound. And we have no sovereignty. No freedom, no sovereignty in the state of bondage. And if we don't want to be bound, if we don't want dukkha, then we need liberation. We need freedom. And so here it says, and if you want to be free, then you need to practice renunciation. Renunciation is literally a very long word, lots of help, and it can be a very heavy idea. The Tibetan expression that we translate as renunciation can be kind of translated as something like this mind that is clear and definite about leaving behind. Kind of like this clear understanding, clear determination that I need to leave behind what I don't want. What I don't want. So that is the mind of renunciation. So what do we not want? We don't want dukkha. So unless this mind, this understanding, this feeling really rise up strongly, then we will continue to kind of get lost in the confusion. So if we don't see dukkha as dukkha, and we continue to kind of make dukkha manageable, nice, smells good, deodorizing dukkha, dukkha cannot. The stench of dukkha is always there. But of course, everything that we see, you turn on the TV, is trying to sell you something else, right? That you can fix dukkha. No, dukkha cannot be fixed. It needs to be abandoned. So that's the sort of at the core of the first level is to basically say, it's enough. I'm fed up with this already. I'm done. Yeah, I'm finished with this. I am finished. Now, of course, 2 weeks later, la la la, and then I'm finished again. La la la, and I'm finished again, right? And that's the human condition. That's the condition of confusion. So don't be so hard on yourself. That's our story, right? I'm reminded of there was a memoir written by a professor back when I was reading those things. A professor that taught at Yale, and he was born as the child of missionaries, I think Presbyterian missionaries in China before communist China. So I think this professor might even have passed away already. So he wrote a memoir of like him growing up in China. And I didn't read the whole thing, I read some of it. But I remember on the cover it said, he talked about how it was very frustrating for his parents and the other missionaries in China because the converts that they made would routinely convert. Like repeatedly convert, And like after spending like a whole lifetime, they're not making any progress, like that. Anyway, so it can feel like that, like we are routinely renouncing, the madness of samsara. But guess what? You're on the right path. You're going in the right direction. If you find yourself routinely giving up on dukkha and say, I have had enough. Because the alternative is really, you're not even aware that there's anything to give up. You're just like, oh, it's fine, But if you find yourself like routinely giving up on samsara, I'm not talking about giving up on this world. That's something else. So don't equate this world with samsara. Okay? Samsara is the state of being. Samsara means like literally it means the cycle, the vicious cycle. Literally it means that the cycle of wandering on. So it's a state of being. We're not talking about giving up on this world, like through the environment, who cares for samsara. No. That attitude is samsara. Right? Equally, the attitude like I'm going to go save the world now. Well, you have just created another samsara. So these are states of confusion. What you need to give up is not this world, but the confusion that we superimpose on this world due to not seeing clearly. So you need to be fed up with it. And if you find yourself like routinely getting fed up, and then you think I'm such a failure, actually the good news is no, you are now on the path. You recognize that, that this is samsara, this is confused existence, and there's an alternative to this. And now we are determined to be free from it. And then until you are Buddha, you are going to routinely having to renounce. But here it's saying, the more we pay attention to what is, then the more we become free from it and say, no, I've had enough of it. There is the description of a Buddhist hell. By the way, yes, Buddhists have hell. Much more interesting than Christian hell. At least, whatever hell that you can find in the Christian Bible, it's very vanilla. Compared to like the hells you can find in Buddhist texts. Oh my God. So there is one hell, I call it the cheese grater hell. That's not the official name. I can tell you what that hell entails. So when you're born into this cheese grater hell, like grating, right? So what happens is that when you're born into this hell, it says that you find yourself at the bottom of like a mountain, and then like completely bewildered, lost, and like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Then you see like your loved ones, and more specifically people that you lust after, miraculously appearing at the top of this mountain and calling you, "Hey, come this way!" So you scale the mountain, it says. So you scale and you scale and you scale, and finally, right, you are up there, and one more push, right, the object of your lust, is all yours. They suddenly turn into big, evil-looking birds with iron beaks, and they will peck your eyes out. Okay. As they are pecking your eyes out, you of course go ah, and you slip. Now that's when the mountain turns into a cheese grater. It says that all these knives will come out on the surface of this mountain, and you scrape yourself into a pile at the bottom of this mountain. Yes.
That sounds really uncomfy.
Does it hurt?
Yes.
Hold me down.
It says that hell beings have high resistance body that will not kill you, but will make you feel all the pain involved. And then the thing about this existence is that you don't just die, actually you pass out from the pain, right? The excruciating pain of, you don't pass out until you are actually about. Then they say a great reviving wind. After you pass out, the great reviving wind will blow across, and you wake up. And you go, ah. And you climb up again, and then once again they turn into these big evil birds with iron beaks and peck your eyes out, and you scrape all the way down. Repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, revive and repeat forever. Well, practically forever. Except that Buddhist hells are not permanent. Once your karma is exhausted in that existence, then you're going somewhere else, maybe a different hell. But this is the cheese grater hell. We have all been there. Yeah? Maybe this time will be different. Right. Go ahead. And as you are being shredded, never again, never again. Then the wind revives you. Hope springs eternal. Maybe it will be different this time. Only to be turned into another power. That's the cheese grater hell. And that's mostly what we're doing. Going back again and again to repeat this pattern of nights. This cheese grater hell story, not story, but describing this particular hell in these terms, I've been kind of interested. I taught for 10 years in 2 colleges. So when I was teaching at Davidson College, there was a student who wasn't taking my class for a course, but he knew that he was going to China after he graduated, and this was his last semester, so he audited my course. So he took my class, and now I don't even remember his name. But a year and a half later, he sends me an email. He goes, "Dear Dr. Lai, hope everything is going well." He said, I first went to this part of China, and then I transferred to another job, like in this really like interior area of China. In this small city, it seems like there's only one other American that exists in this city. And so I found this person, And it's a guy who's slightly older than me. We seem to have the same interests, so we have been hanging out. And one day while drinking tea, somehow I was talking about my interest in Buddhism, and then this guy goes, "Have you heard of the cheese grater, hell?" And he goes, "What?" Hold on. Turns out I taught this person when he was a student at University of Virginia. And they met in somewhere nowhere in China, and they got connected over cheese grater.
Wow.
So Buddhist tradition also says, when you read the descriptions of these hells, the one that sticks out for you was probably the hell that you were in your most recent, surgeon to some hell. So mine is probably the cheese grater hell. I don't particularly remember the other hells that well, but anyway. So this is our situation in samsara. Whether you literally believe in the actual existence of the hells or not, we have all been to these hell realms. That's the basic point. Right? And until and unless we really see, right, the kind of cyclical nature of this and determine that, I want out, then we can't make any progress. Because part of it is we have built up like defense mechanism to make it bearable. And as long as we continue to make it bearable, then there is no real out. You're going to keep the system going. And that's how the system of confusion works. Sometimes it's not even explicitly something is wrong. And in fact, it's often masked as something perfect fine to get away. So this first one is to really see that. Then once we see that, what it means to give it up means it's not just like, I'm fed up, I'm just going to walk away and into like unknown territory. It means stop creating the causes of suffering. So alongside renunciation, then, it is to give up all those actions that create pain and suffering. So under this, there's all this lists of what we would call prescriptions and proscriptions. Proscriptions are what is that it said, if you act in such ways, then these are the results, and so if you don't do it. Prescription is like, if you act in these ways, these are the positive results, and if you want the positive results, engage in them. So teachings about karma is basically focused on this. And in fact, teachings on karma is extremely important because that's the mechanism of suffering and happiness. If you don't want dukkha, don't create the causes of dukkha. So here there's also the mention of then to the three rare and supreme ones, and the three roots go for refuge. These are some technical terms here. The rare and supreme ones are talking about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Buddhas are those who are awake, free from confusion. Dharma are the liberated teachings that Buddhas give. We gave those teachings and practices a method for us to become Buddhas ourselves. Sangha are those individuals who have applied these teachings, these Dharma, these trainings, and have achieved certain states of, they call irreversibility, so that they have become reliable models and guides. That's Sangha. in terms of Sangha as refuge. There is a more general use of the term Sangha, which we could say, like, at least for these few weeks, we are a Sangha, a community. But Sangha as refuge, the way they're talking about here, not just like you and me. They're talking about those who have put the practices into their lives and have actually achieved results where their kind of path to full awakening, there's no question anymore. They won't fall back. So they are irreversible in that sense. So that's Sangha. So it says that this is like the gateway to Buddhist path, is to take refuge, is to seek refuge. So very briefly, I mean, so much of this, we could spend so much time talking about. So very briefly, to take refuge in the Buddha means, most importantly, to trust that it is possible to be awake. And that there are beings that have woken up from confusion. And because they have woken up, it gives us tremendous confidence that I too can wake up. So that's taking refuge in Buddha. Again, I want to emphasize, it's not saying, oh, I will believe everything he says. No, more fundamental than that is you have to trust that it's possible to be free. It's possible to achieve sovereignty, so to say. Freedom. Freedom from bondage. And that he has done it. Siddhartha Gautama has done it. And I too can do it. And therefore, now, I look to him, so to say. Then, confidence in the Dharma as noble rumors. Not, you don't have to start by saying, oh, they are true, I believe. Simply believing in them doesn't do the work. It's like it's something to be applied. So the analogy given in the Buddhist text is the Buddha is the supreme physician. The Dharma is to be medicine. That means you have to take the medicine. Your taking of the medicine, of course, assumes some confidence. If you don't have confidence in the medicine, it's not going to be very effective. In fact, today, there's more research that tells us the bedside manner of doctors is such an important element in actual healing, in actually solving any medical issues. Okay. So there's good evidence that is so important. So likewise, like when we trust that the Buddha, in fact, was awake, and therefore now we apply the medicine, and it can work good and work better. And the Sangha is said to be like the nurses. So to be in the hands of good nurses. And in some ways, even more important than the doctor. In some contexts, you have good nurses that you can rely on. That's the noble Sangha. So that's kind of the gist of what the first level is about. Again, through these 9 weeks, or however number of classes we come to, you're going to hear this from different perspectives. You're going to come back. This is just the overview. The second one, the practice of emptiness and compassion. So here, basically, this verse is divided into 2 parts. The first one is saying, if you don't practice emptiness, how can you cut the root of confusion, the root of samsara? So what does it mean to practice emptiness? It's not going about, like, empty. It's not going about making things empty. That's not the meaning of practicing emptiness. In fact, a more precise expression would be the practice of recognizing or realizing emptiness. And emptiness is a big topic. It's hard right now for me to convey all of it. Basically, I think what's enough right now is to say what emptiness is really talking about is what we see, smell, taste, touch, right? All of our sense experiences cannot be trusted. Cannot be trusted. Now, we don't want to turn all of us into being paranoid. I'm sure you already have enough of it. If you have an account on Facebook. Here, not to believe is talking about, we're not talking about fake news. It's talking about our sensory experiences often immediately makes us go, that's real. That's real. That is what the Buddha raises a question. Have you really seen what's going on? Or simply you're seeing what your limited view is allowing you to see? So we can go into more technical explanation. So here it will say, for those of you who are familiar with this, it says, emptiness is not just emptiness. We're not talking about, oh, see emptiness. I think, this space here. This is empty, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about empty of intrinsic existence. Now we're using technical terms. Or empty of inherent existence. Which is talking about the isness. The things of essences. So what emptiness now means is to see how things don't have essences. And these things are not as solid as our senses. And more importantly, the emotions that get stirred up when we have sensory experiences, those emotions are completely based on a misperception of what's going on. So very briefly and oversimplifying. For now, it's sufficient to just understand. That's what practice of emptiness is talking about. So it says, as long as you don't practice this, then you will continuously be dragged around. They say that it's like an ox with a nose ring. That if you don't train in this emptiness, then you are like an ox being led around by your experiences. Right? Like an ox is being led around, right? By whoever is holding the reins, right? to its nose ring. So they say, be careful who you hand these reins over to. And wherever they pull, you have to go. So right now, our confusion has control of these reins. Wherever they pull, you go. So this imagery is very powerful among yak herders. I don't think any of you have been herding yaks recently, so maybe not as powerful. But trust me, it's a very powerful. Like if you have a beast like a yak, they can cause quite a bit of damage. But once that ring is on their nose, you just tug a little bit immediately, you get their attention. But right now, that's how sensitive we are. But sensitive in the wrong way, not in the liberated way. Our emotions are dragging us around. So it says here, if you don't practice emptiness, how are you going to cut through? Then the next one, love and compassion. And the problem with not practicing love and compassion, then it says, is clinging to the extreme of peace. This is a technical term that we can go into in a lot of detail. But again, here, what it's saying is this. If you practice emptiness wrongly, you might end up being self-satisfied with a sense of peace and serenity that you achieve from disconnecting yourself from all the bazillion things that's going on. But that could become the extreme of peace. Meaning like, almost like the equivalent of what Christians call a false God. Like it looks like God, but it's not. It's a facsimile of the real thing. So if you practice emptiness and then basically just become like emotionally unavailable, checked out, don't want to deal with anyone or anything, cut off from the world, and you say, oh, I have my peace now. It says, that's not what this is about.
Well, I think the lure of opiates is extreme peace.
Sorry?
I said I think that's one of the major lures of opiates
Yes.
is extreme peace.
Yes, extreme peace.
Yes. So extreme that nothing compares.
Yes, nothing compares, and also like
But it's also not the real
you,
thing.
you cling on to it, and it's not the real thing. So it says, therefore, love and compassion is really important. Love and compassion. So to elaborate further on this, if you practice love and compassion, but without an understanding of emptiness, then there's a lot of pain. And again, if you have an account on Facebook, you know that kind of thing. Because they're telling you about how the world is wrong and how so many ways that is wrong, how all these horrible things are happening. I mean, there's no doubt they are happening, right? But the Mahayana training is a kind of training that simultaneously opens your heart to all the pain that is going on in the world, but without being paralyzed by the pain. So that the pain that you recognize in the world becomes fuel for joyful effort to arise for the benefit of others. It has to be joyful effort. It's not martyrdom. It's not like I will suffer for everyone. Then it's not the Mahayana way. It says the Mahayana way has to be accompanied with clear vision and joyful effort. Tricky. So you've heard of the phrase, compassion fatigue. So that's because no training in empathy. But then you have also heard, people was like, oh, I don't have time for this, I need to meditate. That's the extreme of peace. Many years ago when I first came to the area, a colleague was telling me, one day I heard some kids like screaming, like neighbors, came out and the kids were screaming out in the yard. And it's like, what's going on? And they're just like, really upset. And then it's like, where are your parents? And then after a while, parents came out. And, one of them came out. And, I was meditating. So be careful, right? Like so much of like, oh, I need to fix myself. I need to fix myself. So this is when Hinayana gone wrong. The focus on the self becomes selfishness, even with spirituality. And one of the teachers, early teachers that brought Tibetan Buddhism to the West, he says, the ego is so slippery that it will even try to attend its own funeral. And walk along and hold up, be one of the pallbearers, so that it doesn't need to be buried. So spiritual materialism, or a more contemporary expression would be spiritual bypassing. It's the peace, the extreme of peace. You use spirituality to bypass all the difficult things that you don't want. So these two extremes. The Mahayana addresses that problem. We've run out of time, so briefly, Vajrayana the third is called this pristine vision, right? So some of the things, so it says here, so if you don't have pristine vision, you will be fixated on impurity. And what is this impurity? Impurity is the view that this fixation on impurity is to be stuck on, like, it's a version of like misinterpreted Hinayana. Like, life sucks, this is terrible, this is horrible, everything is meaningless. There's one kind of being fixated on impurity. And more specifically here, Vajrayana, you'll hear more of this, Vajrayana takes embodiment seriously. So this body, we say, on the three, so this is a good time to briefly say this. The view of the body, so this is related to view too. It says that in Hinayana, there is a particular view about the body. In Mahayana, there's a particular view about the body. In Vajrayana, there's a particular view about the body. And it says, as a Vajrayana practitioner, you need to have recourse to all three. And then depending on where you are, you need to apply one view or the other view or the other view. So the Hinayana view of the body is what? Some of you should know. Well, what's the image? The Hinayana view of the body is? Yeah, but what is it? It's symmetry? No, come on. Like, it's an image. Okay. It's a skin bag with 9 holes. How can you forget the skin bag with 9 holes? It's almost like next to the cheese grater house. The Hinayana view is to get you to see that what this body is basically a skin bag with 9 holes. And this skin bag is filled with filth. Yeah, count. It is 9 holes. More than 9, you have a problem. Less than 9, you also have a problem. Yeah? And if the plumbing of the 9 holes is off, you have a problem. But basically, it's just waste management. A lot of us are living like that. And pretending that it's not waste management. But essentially, this is a skin bag. And constantly, there's icky stuff oozing out that you need to go manage. So it says, when you see that this is a skin bag with 9 holes, then you don't get fixated on this. It's not saying that you abuse this. No. Because if the plumbing, like I said, is blocked, you have a problem, right? Yes, it's an image of disgust, but not that skewed as whatever image of the body that the commercials are trying to sell you. That's also an exaggeration. Like all the fashion show, whatever, right? That's another exaggeration, and nobody's complaining about that exaggeration. When once someone says, "Oh, it's a skin bag and I was like, oh, you Buddhists are so negative." Tell me what's not true about that. It's a skin bag with 9 holes. A student who said to me, "Why are you Buddhists always so negative?" I was like, "Tell me something that is not true about this, and then I will convert right on the spot, whatever you want me to convert to, It's like, pessimistic or not, that is what this is. Right? But we don't stop there. On the Mahayana, it says, what is this body? It's the temple for the indwelling Buddha. Just as the Bible says, the body is the temple of God. So now it says, what is this indwelling Buddha? Actually, not Buddha per se, but in Mahayana it says, when you have the altruistic mind, the heart mind of benefiting all beings without limit, then this body becomes a temple. So you have to also see that. In the midst of seeing this as a skin bag with 9 holes, you can also see when concern for others arises, immediately this is transformed into a temple for the indwelling altruistic mind. And then everything is like this temple. Vajrayana, this body itself, is the temple, is the palace, but every aspect of our being is Buddha. Not just potentially Buddha, but is Buddha. But we just don't see it. We just don't believe it. In our state of confusion, we have put on so many masks until we have forgotten our true face, our true identity. The Zen tradition talks about this core, this kind of paradoxical question. What is your face, your true identity, before your parents were born? Meaning like primordially, what is your true identity? In the Vajrayana, we said, it's this pristine nature, which is what this vocabulary is back here. It says, so if you look on the next page, it says, that sees the universe as a mandala. Mandala is this divine palace. So see the physical universe as the mandala, and all the beings, without exception, are deities, are gods. And when you can see even your enemy as Yidam, Yidam is the identity that you take on in Vajrayana practice, which is related to these divine forms. And we'll talk about that when we come to the meditation part. So you see a lot of material culture representing, 4 arms, holding a sword, 2 arms, female form. In the Vajrayana, these are called deities, but not in a theistic way deities. Like they are not exactly entities out there, over there, and all powerful. And then we try to get on their good graces. But rather, I think the best example is one that a teacher used. He said, the way, even though we use in Vajrayana especially, we use the language of deities, he said, but it's a very odd kind of deity. So he said, it's like this. He says, non-Vajrayana understanding of deities might be, you find yourself in the hot sun, in the middle of a desert, and then you see a tree with shade over there. And you go, please come here, please come here, please come here, please, please, please come here. You say, that's the non-Vajrayana understanding of deity. Solve my problem for me. I am so devoted to you. And then you praise it, you sing songs about it. So we say, temporarily you might feel a little shade, because you kind of have tricked yourself into believing, oh, shade is so good, shade is so nice, shade loves me so much. Yeah? So that, they say, it's the way that we kind of relate to deities. But the Vajrayana way is to say, oh, shade is so good, shade is so cool, shade is over there. Now I need to go. So may I come to you. Not please come to me, but may I come to you. But a step further, may I become like you. Not only you need shade, but part of why you are going over to that shade is so that you yourself can grow into a tree, providing shade for others. So we are to become the deities. So Yidam is the particular deity that you relate to as the object, as the focus of what you want to become. So here it says, when you can see your enemy as Yidam, then you know you have pristine vision. I'm sure you all have your favorite enemy. Now you have to train to see that enemy as Yidam. And that's Vajrayana training. So Vajrayana training involves, they say, many different techniques. You might have heard the word visualization, but that's an inaccurate translation. Maybe imagination is a better word. Visualization emphasizes too much the visual. In fact, visual is secondary. It's a feeling that needs to be cultivated. And that feeling is related to, more fundamental than these, like, forms, yeah? The specifics of these forms is actually what these forms are pointing to. So we said these are the innate awakened qualities that we possess. And looking at them is sort of a way, sort of like the Zen expression, the finger pointing to them. By relying on these fingers, these deities, and ritual, and so it's, we catch a glimpse of what that moon looks like. Then once we have caught a glimpse of that moon, then our practice involves stabilizing that experience until it becomes a constant. That's when we can see everything that occurs, all forms, they say, are deities. All sounds are divine sounds, mantra. And all thoughts and all emotions is the play of wisdom. So this is like the expansive view, where everything is divine. This is the language and the expression of Vajrayana.
Does that include dukkha?
Yes. Even dukkha is now experienced very different. Which of course means it's no longer dukkha. And in the Mahayana level, even dukkha has already been kind of redefined. And say, see, in the Hinayana, right, you have to take dukkha very seriously. It is a problem. I need to overcome this problem. But once you enter the Mahayana level, it's like, now let's take a closer look at dukkha. What is it really? And then in the Vajrayana, not only is dukkha not really what you think it is, in fact, dukkha is the perverted, you could say, expression of a natural energy, you could say, that manifests itself outwards. Once there is confusion, then that turns into samsara. Reverse the confusion, that natural energy is expressed as the mandala and deities. So Vajrayana uses a lot of many different techniques. Almost too many. Not almost, definitely too many. It's like, well, you could try this, 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 this, and this, and this, and that, and that. Now, different teachers, based on who they think they're talking to and what the students need, you might hear them say, no, do this one thing and just keep to it. Then sometimes the same teacher might say, do this in the morning, do this in the afternoon, do this at night. So it's kind of tailored to what the needs are in that particular time. Don't forget, we change. That's the fundamental principle here. We change. We are capable of changing. Like, you might think, oh, I don't know, don't resonate. Well, you can change. Now, I'm not saying that you should force yourself to change, but just remember, you change. Your habits, good and bad habits, they change. So then that's related to, there is no essence. And we'll see later how not having an essence is actually freeing. It's our obsession with essences that freezes us, that we're stuck. Anyway, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Take the handout with you. We'll try to have some here in case you forget to bring it, but if you come back next time, please bring the same handout.
If you're interested in bringing a snack, one of the following Wednesdays is a sign of sheet we put out in the.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I'll be your son. Yeah, of course. Medical is very simple.
I think
The blood